Magnus Carlsen just played the ALEKHINE'S opening against Alireza Firouzja, and the pawn break that he played on move 5 left the chess world completely shocked. I felt like I was watching Jim Carrey crawl out of a rhino's you-know-what. I have no words for this move G5 by Magnus Carlsen, just like I have no words for what Jim Carrey is doing right now. Okay, that's enough hype. This game was a recent chess.com blitz match between Alireza Firouzja and Magnus Carlsen, and of course, Magnus goes for the ALEKHINE'S defense with the move 1, knight f6. Now from here, we follow the absolute main line. Alireza Firouzja kicks the knight, goes d4, and then heads for the 4 pawns attack with the move c4, hitting the knight, and then f4, supporting the center. Now from here, black has a wide variety of options. Of course, the absolute main line for the ALEKHINE'S defense involves taking on the e5 square, going knight c6, bishop f5, e6, bishop e7, and then finally castles. So for example, real fast here, black typically goes d takes e5, knight c6, hitting the pawn on d4, then bishop f5, then e6, and finally bishop e7 and short castles. However, in the game, Magnus Carlsen was having absolutely none of that. Instead, way back on move 5, here Magnus Carlsen, he busts out an insane idea. He attacks with the g-pawn with the move g5. Oh my goodness, Magnus Carlsen, I have no words for this move. What the heck are you doing? Well, it's not as dumb as it looks. There is actually an idea. Here, the idea is you're trying to bait white into taking the pawn on the g5 square, deflecting the f-pawn from the defense of e5. Then from here, black would simply take on e5, and here if white ever takes back, he just takes the queen on d1 with a fantastic game. So for that reason, white has to block the center. But here after c5, knight d5, black is actually doing quite okay. So overall, this was the idea. However, if white doesn't fall for f takes g5, as Alireza Firouzja did not in this game, then black is in for a world of hurt here. Now, the reason this move g5 is actually so bad for black is white does not have to take. Instead, he has a wide variety of ways of just continuing development. For example, the move knight to c3 is probably the strongest move here. And the idea is if black ever takes on f4, you just recapture, bang, with the bishop, you are doing perfectly fine. Now, instead of this, in the game, Alireza Firouzja, he is an attacking player. He goes for the ultra-aggressive move, queen to h5. Oh my goodness, based on this move, you would think it'd be like 1,200 players duking out against each other, but no, it's Alireza Firouzja versus Magnus Carlsen, and Alireza is busting out the queen on move 6. Now, the idea, of course, is he wants to capture on g5 with the queen instead of the pawn on f4, and if black lets that happen, white is going to have a crushing advantage. Now here, what the heck is black supposed to do? Well, it turns out the top computer line, you actually just allow white to take on the g5 square. For example, you go bishop f5, white takes on g5 with the queen, then you go queen d7 supporting the bishop, and somehow the computer seems to think this is a decent move. Personally, I think it's absolutely insane, but that is modern computer chess for you. Now, instead of that, Magnus Carlsen, once again, he had a very specific idea in mind. He starts by taking on the e5 square with the pawn. Of course, partially the threat here is you now open up the attack of the queen on the d4 pawn. So if white recaptures with the f pawn, recapturing towards the center, then bang, queen takes d4, and Magnus Carlsen has a huge advantage. So for that reason, obviously, f takes e5, not the move. Here, the best move, and the one Alireza plays in the game, is actually knight to f3. The idea is the knight is now in the game, it supports d4, and you're threatening f takes e5 on the next move, and of course, queen takes d4 is never possible. So really solid stuff by Alireza. Now black, bishop f5, interesting idea, trying to get the bishop out into the game, and now what does Alireza do? Well, he completes his idea, queen takes g5, taking the pawn and hitting the bishop, and now Magnus has a very big choice. What do you do? Well, the safe option would be to simply go e6, offering the queen trade and trading into a roughly level endgame. Yes, white has a small advantage, but it's really not that much. White's going to go f takes e5, black goes c5, trying to break in the center, and it's a game. However, Magnus Carlsen, he gives us a treat here. He does not go for e6. Instead, he keeps the queens on the board, and he goes for an absolutely insane idea. I have no idea what he was thinking here. He starts by taking the knight on the b1 square. Bishop takes b1. Fair enough. Good move. Rook takes b1. And here, black has a wide variety of options. Obviously, you can take on either d4 or f4 with the pawn. Queen takes d4 is not possible because of the knight, but still, black has a lot of options. But instead of those pawn recaptures, here Magnus Carlsen goes e4. Oh my goodness, what the heck am I looking at? Now, real fast, instead of this, if Magnus Carlsen was trying to play the best moves, e takes d4 was obviously the way to go. Of course, Alireza still has a big initiative. The idea here is to go bishop to d3 and queen h5, try to lock down on that h7 pawn and stopping black from castling, and from there you just go short castle yourself, and white's going to have a great game. Now, instead, of course, e4 on the board from Magnus Carlsen, and from here, if you have any sort of formal chess tactical training in you, you should immediately start recognizing all kinds of threats for white. I mean, one idea is going to be queen to e5, threatening both the rook and the pawn, or of course, if you take the knight on f3, you just win the rook. Beyond that, knight e5 is going to be an idea. Perhaps the queen and the knight are going to gang up on that f7 pawn. That's going to be incredibly dangerous. So Magnus here already playing with fire. Of course, the idea by e4 is he's trying to deflect the knight's defense of the d4 pawn, but this is just so dangerous. Now here, Alireza in the game, queen e5 is his move of choice. Of course, attacking the rook and potentially sacrificing the knight on the f3 square. Now, real fast, instead of that, knight to e5 may have been even stronger. The idea is you want to follow up queen f5 or queen h5, trying to target f7 with the queen and the knight. So, for example, the best line is queen takes d4, queen h5, and there is simply no good way to defend the pawn on the f7 square. Now from here, black has to sacrifice it. You bring the knight out, white takes, and here we have an absolutely insane game where I'd much rather be white. However, even white's king is super exposed in the middle of the board. Now instead of all this, queen e5 played in the game, threatening the rook on the h8 square and sacrificing that knight, and Magnus obliges. E takes f3. Now this looks insane. You are sacrificing the rook on the h8 square, but Magnus Carlsen literally had no choice. For example, if you go rook to g8 trying to defend the rook, then from here, Magnus simply goes queen takes e4, and he is completely dominating the entire game. He's up one pawn. The bishop's going to come out, then he castles, and white is just crushing black here. So with that in mind, Magnus does find the best move. It's a little bit shocking, but e takes f3 is the way to go. And of course, here, Alireza takes the rook on the h8 square, and now what the heck is Magnus Carlsen supposed to do? Well, Magnus, as usual, shows his flair in this game, and he plays a move I would never play in a million years. That is the idea, queen to d6. Now, when I first saw this move, my spidey senses were immediately tingling. Wait a minute, what if white just goes c5? Then you're forking the knight and the queen. Isn't that just like basically winning for white? Well, that is what Alireza thought in the game, but Magnus Carlsen saw into the future. He busted out his time machine, and here he has the incredible move, queen to g6. Oh my goodness, the queen lift, queen d6 to g6, hitting g2 and the rook on the b1 square. Now keep in mind, the pawn on f3 is also threatening g2. F takes g2, it is a threat, forking the bishop and the rook. Oh my goodness, and all this time, the knight on the b6 square also hanging. What the heck is white supposed to do? Well, he starts with an incredible move, especially in a blitz game, f5, temporarily blocking the queen, and the idea now is the queen is deflected from this g6 square. That is the only square where you can threaten f takes g2 and queen takes b1 at the same time. Now from here, Magnus, he obviously takes, and here Alireza busts out an incredible solution to try and solve his problems. He starts bishop b5 check. Of course, the bishop comes out, hits the king with tempo. Good stuff. Now Magnus c6, pretty obvious move. You obviously attack the bishop, blunt the attack on the king, and you're still attacking the rook on the b1 square. What is Alireza supposed to do with two pieces hanging here? You know what? This is a good time for a puzzle. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to solve this one. This one from white is absolutely incredible. All right, that's enough time. I hope you found it. The move here is you ignore the bishop and you ignore the rook and you short castle. Oh my goodness, this move is so delicious. Look at this. The idea is if black takes the rook on b1, you go bishop to h6 with the discovered attack on the queen, and then you go queen takes f8. Oh, what an unbelievable idea. Okay, here, let's go through the possibilities. In the game, Magnus Carlsen does take the rook, And of course, Alireza goes bishop h6 next, and absolute mayhem ensues from there. Okay, real fast, what are the alternatives? Here, black could have taken on b5, c takes b5. The problem with this move is bishop h6 comes all the same, and again, Magnus Carlsen has no way of stopping bishop takes f8 or queen takes f8. So for example, the best move, knight 6 to d7, bishop takes f8, knight takes, and then rook b to e1, and here, yes, Magnus has an edge, but it is super complicated. Now, instead of all this, the best move in this position would have been simply queen to g6. Now, what's the idea? It's very simple. You just want to go queen g7, forcing a trade of the queens. The queens come off the board, and from there, Magnus will have a crushing advantage in the endgame. And of course, Magnus is the GOAT of endgames, so that'd be a great idea. Instead, Magnus falls for a trap. He gets too cute. Queen takes b1, and obviously bishop h6 is next. The threat, queen takes f8. What the heck is Magnus going to do? Well, from here, Magnus Carlsen, he takes the pawn on the b2 square. Queen takes b2. Alireza Firouzja takes the bishop. Queen takes f8. King d7 is forced. And here, Alireza has a very big choice. The immediate threat, of course, is the checkmate. Queen takes g2 checkmate. You gotta stop that. What are the options? You can simply take the pawn with the pawn, take it with the rook, or try to block the attack from the queen with rook to f2. And in fact, Alireza Firouzja takes the latter option in the game, rook to f2, trying to block the queen. Now, this is a mistake, and the problem with this move is black is simply going to take the bishop on b5 with the queen, and then white still has to deal with the threat of that pawn on the f3 square. So for that reason, instead, rook takes f3 would have been the better move. Immediately, rook takes f3. Then if Magnus Carlsen takes the bishop, that way you're not wasting a second tempo going rook f2, then rook takes f3. But instead, rook f2 on the board. This certainly makes it more exciting for you and me. Magnus takes the bishop with the queen, and here Alireza takes the pawn on f7. This is getting tense. All right, Magnus, queen to b1 check, rook f1, blocking the check, and queen to g6, offering a queen trade. Very good idea by Magnus. Here, if Alireza takes the queen, that is technically the best computer move. However, here, this is going to be an absolutely winning endgame for Magnus Carlsen. So with that in mind, Alireza Firouzja, he makes the practical decision and keeps all the queens on the board with the move queen takes f3. Now from here, obviously, both the bishop and the knight are hanging. Magnus decides to take the bishop, so white is forced c takes b6, a takes b6. And here, finally, the dust has settled, and here's the material imbalance. Magnus Carlsen has an extra pawn and an extra knight. However, his king is stuck in the middle of the board. So with that in mind, Alireza has to go all out on the attack right here, right now, to try and create some complications in the game. And he starts that with move rook e1, pressuring the rook on the e-file. Good move. Queen d6 from Magnus. Now queen g4 hitting the king, and Magnus e6 blocks the check, but now rook to f1. The idea is you want to crash through on the f7 square with the rook. Rook to f7 check. Now from here, Magnus Carlsen has a very big choice, and the best move is going to be king to c7. The idea is after rook to f7 from white, then you simply go knight d7, and suddenly the king has this little fortress around him. The king is perfectly safe, and white's attack is coming to a screeching halt. However, instead of that, Magnus Carlsen, he cannot help himself. Here he busts out with the move c5, but Alireza Firouzja saw this coming, and he has the counter blow. Yes, that's right. He plays the move d5. Oh my goodness, now the king's defense is getting blown the F open. Okay, what's the idea behind this move? Well, there are two ways black could recapture, with the queen or with the pawn. Now, first of all, recapturing with the pawn is not possible because the queen pins the pawn to the king. Now, what about the alternative? Queen takes d5. That's a legal move, but it's not very good. Here, rook to d1 decides the game on the spot. Of course, the queen is being pinned to the king by the rook and defended by the queen on g4. That is GG, my friends. So with that in mind, here, Magnus Carlsen, he simply gets his king out of the way. King to c7. However, he should have played this move a couple moves earlier, as I pointed out. Now, Alireza, rook to f7, pressuring on the 7th rank. What is Magnus going to do? He tries to get that fortress going with the move knight to d7. However, here the difference is Alireza Firouzja has the move d takes e6. That pawn is now a powerful asset, and Alireza has something to play for here. Now, real fast, obviously the threat, if black wastes a move, rook to b8, the immediate threat is simply rook takes d7. That is going to be game over. you win the queen, and there's nothing black can do about it. So obviously black has to respect that threat, but what is he supposed to do here? Well, there is a brilliant double exclamation point move right here. I'm going to make it yet another puzzle. If you want to pause the video, do it right now and try to solve this puzzle. It is absolutely insane. Okay, I hope you found it. The move here for Magnus Carlsen that wins on the spot, essentially, is h5. Oh my goodness. What the heck is this pawn doing? Well, first of all, you are ignoring the threat on the knight on d7. So, for example, if white plays rook takes d7, then queen takes, e takes, and finally the difference here is you simply take the queen at the end and you win the game. Now, of course, white has some alternatives there. You don't have to take the knight on the d7 square. Instead, let's say you move the queen to f5. Similar idea. Well, here's the difference. Now, the queen is no longer on g4. It's no longer controlling the d4 square. And here, Magnus has the idea queen to d4 check. And this virtually forces the move queen to f2 from white. The queens are coming off the board no matter what. So, for example, queen f2, queen takes, king takes. And here, Magnus Carlsen has an absolutely crushing advantage in the endgame thanks to his advanced pawns on the queen side here. Now, of course, this was a blitz game on chess.com, and unfortunately, Magnus Carlsen does not find the insane move h5 here as black. Now, instead, in the game, he goes rook to d8, the obvious move, just trying to support that knight on the d7 square. And here, Alireza, the obvious move is going to be either e takes d7 or rook takes d7. However, he realizes that knight on d7 is pinned. There is no need to take it right away. Instead, he simply takes the pawn on the h7 square. I mean, clearly the best move. And here, Alireza is back in the game thanks to his passed pawns on the king side. Now, this is where things get absolutely insane. It's essentially a pawn race between Alireza's pawns on the king side and Magnus Carlsen's pawns on the queen side. All right, here's how it plays out. Magnus b5, getting those pawns rolling on the queen side. Here we go. And here, Alireza takes on d7 with the pawn. It turns out technically rook takes d7 would have been a better move. It's complicated. I'll let you investigate that on your own. Instead, e takes d7 played in the game, and now Magnus, he keeps pushing. He plays c4. Those pawns are just rolling now. Okay, Alireza, what does he do? Well, in the game, he makes his last and final mistake. Here, he has to keep the queens on the board. That is the only chance in this position. But instead, he simplifies to an endgame with just the rooks and the pawns. Now, the problem is after queen takes, h takes, rook takes d7, this is actually a winning endgame for Magnus Carlsen. Those pawns on b5 and c4 are just too far advanced, and there's very little Alireza can do to stop them. In the game, he goes rook to h5. However, real fast, I want to show you, if he took the rook on the d7 square, this is going to be a winning king and pawn endgame for Magnus. And the basic idea here is you basically just swing the king over to the g4 square, threatening g3. The king has to stay on f2, defending g3, and then you just push your pawns down to promote, and there's nothing white can do about it. So, for example, real fast, this is a sample line that I worked out that shows there's very little white can do here to defend. Now, instead of all this, on move 33, Alireza Firouzja does keep the rooks on the board in the game. That is the right idea. Rooks are fantastic defensive pieces. However, this is not enough. Here, Magnus, he just brings his pawns down the board, and in the end, there is nothing white can do to stop the idea of c1. Of course, the rook controls the d-file. And if, for example, if Magnus goes rook to h1 trying to defend, then bang, rook to d1, cutting off the access to the c8 square, and that is game over. Wow, what an incredible display of chess by Magnus Carlsen in this game. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, do me a favor, go ahead and smash that like button and the subscribe button, and check out my Magnus Carlsen playlist, and I'll see you in the next video.